Today we'll be taking a look at the Exquisite Basic Godzilla 2014, a long-awaited entry from Hiya Toys that was originally due about 3 months ago. I'd like to pay a special thanks to INS Hobby for sending along this review sample and making this video possible. If you like what you see here and you want to order this figure or any other Hiya Toys figures, you can use my link in the description to support the channel. Without further ado, let's take a closer look at Godzilla 2014. Godzilla stands at about 6.5 inches tall, bringing him just about in scale with the rest of the Exquisite Basic line thus far, save for the Kong Skull Island releases. I do find it somewhat amusing that Godzilla felt his largest in the Monsterverse in Godzilla 2014, yet the Godzilla 2014 action figure is probably the smallest one you're going to have on your shelf. This figure appears to use the CGI data from the movie, which is most obvious when you compare it to the NECA Godzilla 2019 figure, which NECA prided themselves on using that same data. I'm using the NECA G19 here because 1, I don't have the NECA G14, and 2, it's a very similar skin pattern to the G14, except that the G19 has a more defined sculpt. And if I may digress for a moment, if any of you remember how much of an improvement the NECA G19 was over their G14 figure, I feel as though the Hiya Godzilla 2014 is a similar improvement in that same direction. While it is smaller than the Godzilla figures that have come before it, Hiya has managed to capture Godzilla's skin texture and accentuate a lot of those details. I particularly like the upper thighs and the area behind his arms where the skin almost juts out from the body. The unique spine appearance has been captured with a high degree of detail, though I do wish there was some kind of wash to help bring it out. I'm sure that the translucent heat ray version coming down the line will really make these babies pop. Speaking of paint, there's more to Godzilla 2014 than you might first expect. The outer surfaces, for lack of a better term, appear to be a very dark green/teal color. And when I say very dark, I'm talking nearly black. It works well in capturing his appearance in the movie without getting just this chunk of black plastic. Making your way to Godzilla's underbelly, you start to get this new tone of tan, which is brighter than I remember it being in the movie, but it also might just be the influence of me seeing my 12-inch tall NECA G14 every day, which has a much darker underside. This change in pigment is consistent with what you see in real-world reptilians, which is a nice touch. This tan color even continues onto the back of Godzilla's legs, which I have mixed feelings about. To me, this tan color should be present on the inside of his legs rather than the back, but I did have to think about it for a bit. It felt like the "if a horse was wearing pants" joke. Finally, there seems to be red tones throughout the body, almost red-pink in some areas. I've noticed it in areas like underneath the arms, the inside of the calves, as well as along the tail. While it works to add a new dimension to the overall color scheme, I'm not sure what it's supposed to be. Personally, I like to think that it's blood from his battle with the Mutos, which also just happens to justify some of the messy red paint in the teeth, as well as a slightly discolored nose. Overall, the sculpt is solid, but the paint choices leave me scratching my head a little bit. In terms of articulation, Godzilla 2014 feels familiar to the figures we've seen previously in the line, with some notable upgrades. He looks side to side fairly well, but just be careful to not expose the socket in the head as you do so. There is a new system in the neck to assist with looking up and down, but keep in mind that the head also has a piece of the neck sculpted in, which can look disjointed if he looks up too far. The torso sits on a double barbell joint, adding a small degree of movement in all directions. The shoulders plug into the body on ball joints, adding a full rotation and a small degree of movement in and out, very familiar to what we've seen before. Here's where things get new. A second swivel hinge system has been added at the bicep in the arms, adding a greater range of motion when it comes to bending those arms. It's a little bit hard to specify with angles and such, but you have enough flexibility for Godzilla's fingers on one hand to touch the opposite shoulder, which is greatly appreciated. The thighs appear to plug in on a single ball joint as opposed to the double barbells we've seen on the NECA figures. These joints provide full rotation, but a very limited amount of in and out motion. Godzilla has double jointed knees that can bend very far with a swivel at the lower joint. Ankles are on ball joints that allow for both a swivel and ankle rocker motion, if somewhat limited. As you can see, the tail has a high degree of articulation. I think that this is the closest that Hiya has come to achieving Monster Arts levels of tail movement, and I'd be curious to see if they can push it even further in the future. As for accessories, Godzilla comes with a set of closed hands/fists. Swapping them out is easy, and you can use them to depict a grappling action or even a fun shot of Godzilla throwing hands. To summarize, Hiya's Godzilla 2014 is a step up from other interpretations you may already have in your collection, while being very familiar to the figures you may already own from Hiya Toys. The sculpt work is great, and the improvements in the neck, arm, and knees make me both happy about this release as well as excited for future releases, such as the Godzilla Evolved and 91 Hokkaido suit that we still haven't gotten yet. The paint on my copy is okay for the most part, but I can easily see how some folks may get copies with distracting levels of variance. We already know that a heat ray version is on the way, and while I expect that the paint apps will be dialed in for that one, the way that Hiya tends to do, I don't expect that we'll get another default G14 unless they reissue this mold down the line, or if they do a Monarch Legacy of Monsters version with modified spines, which I would be very interested in. As someone who never had the 6-inch NECA G14, I'm happy to have this guy on my shelf next to the female Muto, but I also understand if folks are waiting for a more refined version, as Hiya has done in the past. That's going to be it for me, but I'm curious to hear from you. Are you interested in picking up the Hiya Toys Godzilla 2014 figure? Are you going to wait for a different version down the line? Are you going to skip it entirely? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd once again like to thank INS Hobby for sending along this review sample, and if you like what you see here and if you want to support the channel, you can use my link in the description to buy this figure or any other Hiya Toys figure. And for probably the last time in 2024, thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again in the new year. Bye-bye!